Once Upon a Time in Box Canyon. There are some roads that stretch into the mountains. There's not really much behind the mountains except on the other side of mountains or hills is Simi Valley. It's this little place that's sort of surrounded by foothills and one or two roads, one of which is Box Canyon. And that particular road just serviced, there was not much, it was just a pathway about 2 miles long from the west end of the valley, and then it sort of tanked over to the Santa Susana Pass. At one end, up in the mountains, was a government facility called Rocketdyne, which experimental situations for small satellites. Several of the labs had some pretty disastrous nuclear incidents. It's still to this day a very contaminated area and mode of contention in California. It passed from that kind of development into a facility used for testing the rocket engines that were all used in the Apollo program, where they had to create these huge rocket engines. When I came in, I was just in high school in the west end of the valley, and in the middle of an English class, the ground would start shaking and you'd hear this terrible rumble and things like that. And everybody just sort of stopped talking and sort of, twiddled their pencils and things. And I wondered, what the heck is going on? And then they explained that, twice a week they would do these static rocket tests up on the mountain, up there in the hills. And everybody just had to, successful in that endeavor, they would pack them up on a big truck and take them down to the LA harbor, put them on a boat. Boat would go all the way through the Panama Canal, back up into Cape Kennedy, where they would expeditions they did in outer space. Then as you traverse the canyon, it started from just the edge of the mountains, just a small little community of miscellaneous houses. My little house, which was basically a shack, the only thing that was touching the ground was the doorstep, because everything else was on stilts, and the whole house was sort of crooked, but it was a basic house that students would live in and go back and forth to the college. Most of the houses in this little canyon were created just off the rocks and right by the side of the road, no depth, no more roads going off of that road. That was just sort of it's only about 2 miles long, and it has kind of an interesting time spread. My particular involvement was in about 1968 when I was a student at a college down below in the valley, and I found a place to live up there. It was cheap away, and I had a motorcycle and a car, and I just would ride in and go to class and then go back into this strange little neighborhood. Surrounding area, there were a couple of movie ranches that were sets back when there was a lot of movie production in Hollywood. They would have these old western towns, and there's a couple of those up there. Spahn Ranch at the very end. In the middle was the movie ranch. There was also some cabins up there where various cowboys were featured in different movies, and a lot of the times people would just they'd send the crew up there just to ride through the rocks. All the horse gallops around, and it was much closer to Hollywood to get them riding up and down the trails and going in the cowboys firing at each other from the rocks and such. And a lot of people had horses, and they would be out riding horses, or they would keep them there, but it wasn't a lot of area to graze a horse, so one or two in a small little stable would be about it. notably at the end of the uh, road, sort of at the end of the road, was a place called Fountain of the World. It was a church that was a kind of a cult following. It started maybe 10 plus years before I even arrived, and their claim to fame was that they would be barefoot and robes, and they would, ask for tithing and things. But it was an interesting premise in that they had very strict codes. But in one case, there was a plane crash up in the mountains, and they actually got a little bit on TV and everything for helping out. They sent them en masse to, help and assist the firefighters and first responders, and they were very good reputation that way. But internally, they had some problems, and a couple of the disciples had a disagreement with the cult leader, and it followed suit that the two individuals that had the disagreement wrapped themselves with 20 sticks of dynamite, blew up one of the church buildings, which was just a house at the end of the road, and 10 people passed away in that event. But that was 10 years prior to my coming up to the mountain. around the other little end of the mountain was the infamous Spahn Movie Ranch, which was also was basically a set for movies. And then as time went on, they just rented it out for people who wanted to take horseback riding throughout the hills and such. And I was involved with the Spahn Ranch in that I was doing a photography assignment for my classes, and using the hills as a backdrop. And I took another individual up there, and we were just shooting some pictures with the stones as a backdrop. And we were finished and went back to a little hamburger place. And these guys came in and they saw the camera and the tripod and stuff and said, "Oh, you guys want to take some pictures? We got a movie ranch up here. Come on up to the movie ranch." And I think they were more interested in the girl that I was using as a model, but she didn't want to go. So she had to go back to a class or something. So they were stuck with me. And so I went up to the Spahn Movie Ranch and had an interesting afternoon. It was a long afternoon. I got involved in chasing down horses because one horse got out of one corral and was supposed to go back into another corral. And so I helped out by just sort of raising my hand and guiding him into the right slot. Other things that happened, I ended up meeting, actually having dinner at the Spahn Ranch with Old Man Spahn and his wife, and they made pork something or other that was sort of like charcoal briquettes. It was really overcooked. But I met him, and he was blind at that point, and he would be like the guru of horsemanship. And he would sort of sit in this chair at the end of the wall, surrounded by all this horse tack, and the individuals that were there, and I didn't realize it at the time, but these were all a lot of the Manson crowd. They were helping out at the ranch in order to stay there, and they would just sort of like hold up something, and he couldn't see it, but he would take it in his hand and say, "Oh, this is a bridle for a such and such. This goes to the sorrel in the corner," or whatever the horse was named or whatever. And so he was the end word on bridling and handling of the horses and stuff, because they all looked really nice. And then I met a guy called Shorty Shea, who actually they found in pieces a couple years later. And I never did meet anybody else other than a few of the people. I don't even remember their names. Never met Manson but I did sort of travel down a little bit of the back road to where they all sort of lived off the side of the movie ranch. And so that was that aspect of it. And then also the area was home to a lot of individuals that sort of wanted to start they were very private individuals, and they had their own reason for being there. One individual was a fellow that came out during the Dust Bowl, left Oklahoma with a couple of old school buses and drove to California to find his goal. And so he found Box Canyon. It was a low, isolated, had a little house there, and he stuck his school buses up on blocks, and they became his church. So that was where he held his services by himself, and maintained these two old school buses just on blocks. They were like this 1936 school bus was just beautiful, but a lot of people tried to buy it, but he wouldn't sell it because it was his own relationship with that. And later on, I guess he came into hard times or something, and an individual that I knew from down in the school, he had some money. I didn't have any money, and he liked the bus, so we convinced this guy to sell us the school bus, which we had, and we rode around the west end of the valley. It didn't have any seats in it. It just had the one seat for the driver of the bus, and so I put this old armchair in there, and we would be riding along, and I'd be sitting in this stuffed armchair, and we were riding around. And then we found out later that there was this he was a guy that lived up in the area, and he had his eyes on this bus too, but he couldn't buy it, and the guy wouldn't sell it to anybody. Finally, we bought it, and then he was really angry that somebody else bought his bus. So he was looking for the two guys that bought his bus, and his name was Charlie Manson. Now, I had no dealings with this until perhaps the next summer. Nothing sort of went on during that summer, the 68, when I was there, other than they had their own little followings up there. But when I was in Italy, I opened up the magazine, the Look magazine, and the day the moon landed, and they had the big thing about all these things, first step on the moon. And then they had this whole spread about the Tate LaBianca murders and Manson and all these pictures of this Spahn Ranch and all this. And I'm going like, whoa. At the very edge of the small length of the Box Canyon and that area, two trains were approaching each other. One was a freight train coming down from San Francisco. The other was a metro liner going up on its regular run up to Santa Barbara. And there was a mix-up in the signaling and resulting in a large crash just outside of the tunnel. 25 people died. It was called the Wolseley Fire. Swept out of the mountains, down in through Malibu. Its origins were the Santa Susana test facility from Rocketdyne, 2 electric lines that sparked and created the fire in November of 2018. So one more at the edge of the Box Canyon.